Dr. Jennifer Spear, and I am the chair of the History Department, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here today. I'm just going to be speaking for a few minutes, and then I'm going to be introducing the other three people who will be speaking to you later. And I do want to say thanks to your teacher for inculcating great values, coming and sitting up at the front of the classroom. And I've also been asked to pass along a message about cell phone usage. This is an hour where you are supposed to be pretending that you are students in an academic classroom and in a university classroom, and cell phones should not be being used in that context. Okay, I'm just going to speak about the History Department. You've had a chance to meet some of my colleagues. We are a very vibrant young department of 28 faculty who teach subjects that range all around the globe. We have somebody who does Arctic history or Northern Canadian history. We have somebody who teaches Southern African history. So we really span from north to south. And we also span from east and west with people covering Europe, the Americas, and Asia as well. In terms of topics, we teach politics and gender and religion and labor, social movements and war, pretty much anything that humans have done in the past. And one of the groups that passed through my office half an hour or so ago was asking me, what I thought history really was. And I said, really is looking at people and how people shape their lives and make change happen, and how we got from point A to point B. And I think you're going to see a couple of examples of that today. We have particular strengths in the early modern world, so the sort of first age of globalization in the 15th and 16th and 17th centuries, colonialism and empire spanning the globe, and of course we do have strengths in Canadian history too. So our faculty are constantly coming up with new subjects to teach. We have 2 new courses that are going to be taught next year on the history of the environment, if you're interested in global change, climate change, and also in the history of technology as well. So those of you thinking about engineering, that would be a great class for you to take. We love teaching, and we have many teaching awards to prove, to demonstrate that. And in fact, one of our 2 people who will be talking to you today is a University Prize award-winning teacher. And Emily's not bad herself either. We also really take our research seriously, and we bring our research into the classroom as well, and really involve you in the process of how we understand what we understand about the past. And as you'll see today, we also sometimes bring a little bit of music. I don't, but many of my colleagues do. All right, the next speaker is going to be Clare Wilson, who is from the SFU Central Recruitment Office, and she is a graduate of our program. She has a BA in history and GSWS, gender, sexuality, and women's studies. So she did a joint major in 2 different disciplines. And she's going to speak to you for a few minutes about recruitment. And then after that, we're going to have Professor Mark Lear, who is going to give this talk up here, Thinking About History, play a little banjo for you. He is a professor of Canadian history and labor history and anarchism and social movements. And then following Professor Lear is going to be Professor Emily O'Brien, who is a historian of Renaissance Italy and particularly works on the papacy and the popes. And she is going to be lecturing about singing as a historical source. You're going to get a couple of musical examples. At the very end, Tammy, who most of you have probably met, will wrap up. And our undergraduate advisor, Tessa, will be here to answer any questions that you might have. So with no further ado, I turn it over to Clare.
Thank you kindly. I am going to put the lapel mic on because I'm a hand talker. I don't want to accidentally send that thing flying while I'm chatting. Thank you guys all so much for coming. As Dr. Spear just mentioned, my name is Clare. I graduated from SFU in 2013, and I've been in recruitment ever since. So I travel around Canada to other provinces and a little bit here in British Columbia as well to talk with students, talk with parents, counselors about SFU, about our programs, that kind of thing. So one of the questions I get asked a lot, and I was certainly asked a lot when I was a student in history and gender, sexuality, women's studies, what am I going to do with an arts degree? I think there is a real temptation to following a very straight A to B path. I will study accounting, I will be an accountant. I will study nursing, I will be a nurse. And it's not to say that those professions are not valuable, because they absolutely are. But sometimes it can be a bit scary to say, I will study history. Am I going to be a historian? There's kind of a finite number of them in Canada. It's not a huge career field. What can you do with that history degree? What can you do outside of what you might typically think of as a regular history job? So For fun this morning, I jotted up a little list of, all my friends who I met in the history department, we've all graduated. What's everybody doing now? So I thought I'd kind of give you a little bit of a mix. There's me, I work in recruitment, theater actor, law student, financial planner, museum curator, archivist, fashion blogger, librarian. This is the weirdest mix of things I have ever heard. But if you think about it, they do have something in common, and those are the sorts of jobs, and those are the sorts of people that fit well with those jobs who like to question everything. They're not going with the status quo. They're not keeping up the exact same thing that they've always heard. They really want to get to the bottom of what they know and how they know it, what they do, and how they do it. And that's something that history really prides itself on, and SFU as well. We've got a very long, very fanciful, very radical history of protests and sit-ins and really questioning everything. So if that's the sort of thing that appeals to you, definitely look into it a bit more. If you really like history, there's a great book on it, but I won't go too far into all of that. So while you're here today, definitely take advantage of finding out what it is like to be a university student. Dr. Lear and Dr. O'Brien are going to give you a fantastic preview of what their courses are like and what it is like to be a student here. So take advantage of that. Enjoy your time on campus. I know you're not exactly swimming in free time in your grade 12 year, so thank you so much for taking the time to come up here, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Enjoy. Afraid to set it down in case I Exactly, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire. Hello. Nice to see all these new faces, and nice to see a couple of faces from before. Professor Spear talked about how new this place is, and I'm not new. I'm so not new, I taught some of your teachers. This is a scary thought. But welcome. Because I'm a historian, the first thing I want to do is give you a quiz. I'd like you to think of one word to sum up what you think or feel about Canadian history. You don't have to shout it out. You can just think one word that comes to your mind right off the bat. If you are like some of my students, the word that first comes to mind about Canadian history is boring. All right? A lot of students tell me they think Canadian history is going to be boring. Right? And I've thought a lot about that. Why is it boring? And I have to tell you, when I studied Canadian history in high school, I thought it was boring. Right? You had told me that I would spend years teaching Canadian history. I think I would have shot myself, all right, when I was in high school. So I've spent some time trying to think about why it is that people think Canadian history is boring. And one reason that a lot of people find it boring is that a lot of it seems to be, we're told that it's about memorizing names and dates. I know your teachers don't do that, but there's a sense that you know Canadian history when you can answer all the things on this quiz. Right? What are Canada's 2 national sports? What university developed the world's first anti-gravity suit? When was O Canada proclaimed as Canada's national anthem? I don't know the answer to most of these questions, and I lived through some of them. Right? I was there when we went metric. I don't remember. And the reason that I don't is that I love trivia. If you're ever playing Trivial Pursuit, you want me on your team. I totally kick butt. All right? But I don't think it's very helpful. That's not why we study history, so we can just answer all the stuff on the quiz. Because trivia itself is not always very useful. Now, it's great. It's really helpful if you get on Jeopardy. Right? That's, I love it that the last category that nobody wanted was Canadian cities. We'll take everything else on the board because we know nothing about Canadian cities here. But I think there's another reason, a more important reason why sometimes Canadian history is boring. And I think that's because what's important about history is not the trivia. It's about interpretations, how we make sense of the past so we can think about the present. But lots of the teaching of history, lots of those interpretations are a form of propaganda. They are attempts by people to make you think in a particular way, to do something they want you to do. Often, go to war, right? Or support policies that you might not want to agree with. And so, lots of times the history that we're exposed to in the media and other places is about trying to push you in directions that you may not want to go. And because you're young and because you're smart and because you resist authority, you push back by tuning out. Right? So the trivia part sometimes can be boring, and the propaganda we often can sniff out can also be extremely boring and resentful. This isn't a notion that I invented. It's something that a guy named Tom Paxton even wrote a song about years and years ago. And you can help me sing it. The first two lines are the chorus that repeats, so you can just, it's in tune this time. I got here early. What did you learn in school today, dear little child of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little child? That's the chorus part, so just practice that a few times in your head. I learned that Washington never told a lie. I learned that soldiers seldom die. I learned that everybody's free. And that's what the teacher said to me. And that's what I learned in school today. That's what I learned in school. You ready? What did you learn in school today, dear little child of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little child of mine? That wasn't bad. That wasn't bad. I learned that policemen are my friends. I learned that justice never ends. I learned that murderers die for their crimes, even if we make a mistake sometimes. And that's what I learned in school today. That's what I learned in school. You ready? Here comes your part again. What did you learn in school today, dear little child of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little child of mine? That was really good. I learned our government must be strong. It's always right and never wrong. Our leaders are the finest men, so we elect them again and again. And that's what I learned in school today. That's what I learned in school. What did you learn in school today, dear little child of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little child of... Some of you aren't singing. You think I can't tell because you're moving your lips, but I can tell. So try it again. This time try to exercise to sing it. And if you're sitting beside someone who's just mouthing it, poke them. Make them sing. What did you learn in school today, dear little child of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little child of mine? I learned that war is not so bad. I learned of the great ones we have had. We fought in Germany and in France. Maybe someday I'll get my chance. That's what I learned in school today. That's what I learned in school. So, thank you. And thank you so much for singing. And so, point of the song is that people often teach us history to make us do something that we might not want to do or that we want to think about a lot more carefully. They're trying to short circuit our brains. And I want to suggest to you that history becomes exciting and interesting when you use it the way that Ernest Hemingway, a famous writer, thought that you could use history as a machine. He said the most essential gift for a good writer, he said, is a built-in shock-proof shit detector. And I think that's a necessary thing for all of us. We all need our shit detectors. And history is an important part of calibrating that detector. I feel really embarrassed swearing at you. Excuse me. Thank you. You've heard this word before, have you? Yes, you're a very tough crowd. Yeah. But one of the things that we learn when we study history, the important thing that we learn is that shit flows downhill. Okay? If you know that, you can be a plumber. All right? And when we think about societies, what that means is we want to look, when we see problems, when we see challenges, we want to look up to the people in power. They're the ones pouring, right? They're the ones that have the tools, that have the government and the money. They're the ones that open up the big valves that then pour all over the rest of us. So if you want to be a good shit detector, you have to look up to the people with power. And this is part of what history can teach us to do. Do you recognize this picture, or can you guess what this is? Fathers of Confederation. Right, that's right. How come they're the Fathers of Confederation? There are no mothers. Yes, that's right. Women didn't have the vote, right? That's an important thing to think about. Women were not part of this big discussion about Confederation, right? That tells us something important about the system they wanted to put together. This painting has 36 of the Fathers of Confederation, but the picture itself is a distortion of history. Right? The first way it's a distortion is that we know that not all of the fathers were ever in the same room at the same time. There was never one moment where they were in this room, all 36 of them. So it's an artist's impression of what it might have looked like, right? So the picture, just in terms of the facts, the trivia, it's kind of inaccurate. It's inaccurate in another way as well, I think, because it shows people with great seriousness setting out to engage in the serious work of creating a new country, of creating a new democracy. And that's a problem. It's a problem because, as we've discovered, of course, this democracy did not include women. Right? Half the population. It didn't include a lot of other people as well. And that was not a mistake. It was not an error or an oversight on their part. It was part of their plan. Right? So one of the Fathers of Confederation, George Etienne Cartier, said that we want a non-elected Senate. So we have the House of Commons where we elect representatives, and the Senate also has to vote in favor of a bill to make it become law. And he said, we don't want these people elected. We want a non-elected Senate appointed by the Prime Minister as a power of resistance to oppose the democratic element. We don't want the people running everything. They just mess it up. Right? And his friend and our first Prime Minister, Johnny MacDonald, made a similar point. He said that in a democracy, one of the principles of democracy is rule by the majority. But he said, the other principle is we must protect the rights of minorities. That makes perfect sense. And then added, and the rich are always fewer in number than the poor. And that's why we want a non-elected Senate to protect the rich. So by looking at this, by thinking that we want a shit detector to figure out why our society was created the way it was, by looking up at the powerful, we get some insight into the way our world works now. One of the other fathers put it even more bluntly, George Brown, when asked about why do we want Confederation? And his answer was, it is an empire we have in view. An empire. Important thing about empire, it's not a good thing. Right? It usually means that a few people are bossing around a bunch of other people. They're controlling them. Right? That's what it means to have an empire. It's not neutral. It's not just another way of saying a government. So we can use history to ask ourselves, was a democracy really in their plans? And one of the answers that we come to is that, well, a very limited form of democracy at best. And that observation might be useful and helpful for us. It might be, this interpretation might be helpful because if, like my students, many of you think Canadian history is boring, you might be like a lot of my students in another way as well. I have them do something called a political compass. You can go online and do it. And this shows you where different people are arranged on a left-right axis and an authoritarian libertarian axis. All right? My students are represented by the red dots. Right? That's roughly where they all pop in. And my guess is that most of you would be in that corner. That's not a corner occupied by any of our political parties in Canada today. Right? They are in a different spot. My point is that the people who are running this country may not share your values. And they have inherited a system that does not necessarily allow you to be clearly and fully represented. That's the point of my little history lesson today. And I think this is crucial because another old white guy, another guy a little older than me, once said that the young would always rather do noble deeds than useful ones. And I think that's glorious. I think we need your nobility. We need your sense of what is right, of what is just, if we are going to improve, if we're going to get better, if we're going to make a better community, a better country, a better world. But Aristotle also attached a warning to that. He said, the young are also easily deceived because they are quick to hope. Well, we need that hope as well. And I think then the purpose of history is to remind you to try to keep on to that hope while being critical and thoughtful and learning from our past. To be that shit detector yourself and to apply that knowledge as we try to move ahead to make a better world. That to me is the purpose for studying history. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you. It is my pleasure now to introduce Professor Emily O'Brien. Go.
Thank you. It's going to take me a minute to set up here so you can chat amongst yourselves about all the great things you just learned from Professor Lear. Okay. So, good afternoon, everybody. I've already been introduced as a professor here who teaches Renaissance European history. My specialty is Italy and the papacy. I also do the Middle Ages. The term Middle Ages is not quite as appealing as the term Renaissance, rebirth. It's kind of boring. It's stuck in the middle between the ancient world and that glorious rebirth of the ancient world. But it's a pretty interesting period, too. One that you may be familiar with through some of the things you're seeing here in the screen. Anyone identify anything up here? What's that? Monty Python, yes. An older representation of things medieval that you might not be so familiar with, but a fantastic one to be sure. Please tell me you know what's up right above Monty Python. Assassin's Creed. Thank you very much. And many of you have seen or probably heard of Kingdom of Heaven. And we have a show about the Borgia popes and their scandalous lives directly above. Lots of ways in which popular culture engages with the period that I study and that I teach. So when I was thinking about how I could introduce you to the kinds of classes you would take in the history department at university, I thought I'd pick a topic that some of you are probably familiar with, certainly a very popular one, but try to approach it in a new way. And in so doing, pick up on the musical theme that Professor Lear has already started us on. And that topic is the Crusades. One from my experience that is at the top of the list of things to study when students come into my class in the Middle Ages or in the Renaissance, and that's great. I'm excited to have students come and learn about a topic that is so fascinating and that is so critical to understanding the world, not just medieval Europe or medieval Italy, my own specialty, but so many dimensions of the relationship between medieval Europe and the rest of the world. Most of my students come to my classes with some sense of the Crusades, often through things like Assassin's Creed, or they have to tell me all the things they learned from Orlando Bloom in the Kingdom of Heaven. And then I proceed to tell them they need to unlearn most of those things. Usually, they don't know anything about the music that came out of the Crusades. And that's why you have up here on the screen what you do. You're looking at the lyrics of a crusading recruitment song. It was written in 1146 after the Christian armies had suffered a devastating loss in territory recently taken over again by Muslim fighters and rulers in the Middle East. And this song was written on the eve of the Second Crusade, which was an attempt to get that territory back. It's a song that was part of a larger, coordinated recruiting effort to get people to go on crusade. And it was an effort that was spearheaded by both the popes and the secular rulers of the time, kings and princes, trying to rouse support, raise an army to send off another fighting force far away to what the Christians saw as the Holy Land. So why do I want to talk to you about crusading recruitment songs? It's a chance for you to see something very important that we do here in history at university. One of the things it shows you is that in history courses in university, you will have the chance to study unexpected sources, right? How many of you thought you were going to be reading and thinking about the lyrics of songs? In both of our lectures, in fact. Compelling sources. And you're going to learn how to wrestle with them. And that's a pretty exciting task to be given. You'll also learn, from what I'm going to show you, that doing history involves taking up some really important and pretty challenging questions and trying to make sense of them, especially why questions. So stay tuned for the big why question we're going to be discussing. And history is also, I hope that you will learn here at university, is something that shows you how to think about the past in a complex way by building up a whole lot more than simply the inventory of names and dates and battles and other events of the past. It helps us understand people. And that's something that's already been said by Dr. Spear, the chair of our department. The complex ways in which people work and make decisions and what goes on inside their heads. What makes them tick, what they care about, and why. So, all of these things you should be able to get out of the next 15 minutes or so. Before we dig into the song as a way of accomplishing that, I want to give you a little bit of background, historical context, which will give you tools to do that digging. And I'm going to start with a pretty important definition here. The definition of the word crusade. Capitalized to distinguish it from the other kind of crusades you may have encountered, like the crusade to, say, make spring break last 4 weeks instead of 2 weeks. There are different definitions for this term. So the Crusades, as I'm going to talk about them, and the original definition of the word refers to a series of military expeditions that were undertaken by Christians in Western Europe starting at the end of the 11th century and through many centuries, but for us until the end of the 13th century, to recover what they saw as the Holy Land from Muslim rulers and to check Muslim expansion more generally in that part of the world. It was, in essence, a holy war. And the word came from the fact that crusaders, those who fought on campaigns, were told to set off on these expeditions with a cross painted on their foreheads and to return home with a cross on their backs. And here you have some images of crusaders. They put the cross all over the place, right? On flags, on shields, marking themselves very clearly, cruce signati, by the cross. The Crusades and the attempted Crusades that continued past the 13th century were serious affairs that didn't happen constantly, but again and again and again, people went on crusades. So much so that people find it hard to count just how many crusades there were. There was a sustained interest in this activity. And why was that the case? Well, we'll deal with that question more explicitly in a minute, but I want to give you a sense of how it all started. It was triggered initially, just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about here. Here's medieval Europe, especially Western Europe. Most of the Crusaders come from this area here. And over here is what we're going to be talking about, what they saw as the Holy Land. At the end, middle really, of the 11th century, the Crusading movement was triggered by a people called the Seljuk Turks. Very powerful warrior tribe that came out of Central Asia, converted to Islam, started developing an empire on what Christians had long considered their own territory, right down in here. And they moved further in than what this map indicates. It wasn't so much the fact that you had Muslim rulers in this territory that upset the Christians back in Europe. It was the fact that these Seljuk Turks proved very inhospitable, very unwelcoming to Christian pilgrims who continued to go there to visit holy sites, to practice their faith, to see Christian churches, the places where Jesus had been, had lived, had died. So rumors started to come back from this part of the world that Christians were being persecuted, that churches were being torched, that the precious things so important for the spiritual experience of Christians were being torn apart. And along with those rumors, you were getting maydays from this place, the Byzantine Empire. Also Christian, though not quite the same way as those in Western Europe. And it felt like it was about to be attacked, and it was, by those Seljuk Turks moving into their territory. Come over and help us. Bring your armies. Save us from these destructive forces. That was the call. And so, in 1095, the Pope, not surprisingly, and others as well, leaders of states at the time, called Christians together, the warrior class, to take up their arms and go fight to win back this territory, to rescue the church, to rescue the Christians there. And these lines, these arrows, show you the routes that they followed and from where they came. Overland from the Holy Roman Empire, from France in particular, from Italy, all the way down here, and as far as Jerusalem. And they got as far as Jerusalem in victory. These crusaders, at first, brought smashing success to the Christians, defeating the Turks decisively, and within 4 years had set up their own Christian crusader states, taking over that territory that had been won over by the Muslims and that was jeopardizing Christians living and traveling there. Mission accomplished, huh? Not so much. The Turks regrouped and fought back, and for the next 200 years, Christian crusaders found themselves being handed one humiliating loss after another. And after that first crusade that was so successful, pretty much all the other ones were defensive and failures, with the lands of these crusader states shrinking continuously until the 1290s, when the last crusader state fell. So from the perspective of the Christians, the Crusades were overwhelmingly unsuccessful ventures. And those failures started racking up pretty early after they started. So let's take a closer look at individual crusaders and how that sense of struggle played out for them. No matter what Hollywood, no matter what your video games tell you, going on crusade was not a glamorous adventure. It was expensive, it was dangerous, and for everybody who took part in it. Let's start with the price tag. You're looking at about 6 or 7 years of your income, what you needed to equip yourself and to travel, to support yourself while you were on crusade. This impoverished people and their families significantly and repeatedly. And then you're gone for a year, couple years, a disruption of your life. Think about your husband going away or your child traveling far away where you didn't have a cell phone to reach them, no texting, no Facebook, no nothing. Disruptions on so many levels of great proportion. And the people traveling there were looking at a 2,000 to 2,500 mile journey. No charter flights, no SUVs, no Jerusalem Hilton that they would be able to check into when they got there. Trying, understatement of the year. Starvation, disease would be your constant companions, or the threat of them for sure, and they would remain with you during your campaigns, in which very likely you would be wounded, if not killed. The odds were very high that you would not come back. And maybe no one would know what had happened to you, whether you'd gotten killed, whether you'd been captured. It was, in other words, a tremendous risk, a tremendous sacrifice, whether you were successful or not, whether you returned or not. And yet, what's amazing, and for us, the question of the day, is that people not only embraced these risks and these odds, but they did so by the tens of thousands. And for 200 years. It wasn't just knights, professional warriors who went off on crusade. It was peasants, men and women too. The elderly, imagine your grandparents going on this kind of adventure. Children banded together and went on very unsuccessful crusades. Most were abducted. People from all walks of life, all parts of society were drawn, including the elite of the aristocracy. Dukes and princes and counts poured into the crusading forces. And some expeditions were positively star-studded. The kings of England and France, the Holy Roman Emperor, routinely went on crusade. And once they did all at once, and they really didn't like one another, and that made for a very awkward journey and a very awkward experience. Good thing they didn't all have to ride on the same bus. And as they risked their lives, they were also risking their very fragile kingdoms. So here's our question. Why? Why did they do it? One historian has been far more eloquent. Crusading was so unpleasant, so dangerous, so expensive, that the more one considers crusaders, the more astonishing their motivation becomes. What in the world did they think they were doing? Why did catastrophes, and we heard about many of them, only heighten their enthusiasm? So here's where the music comes in. And before we look at these lyrics a little more closely, I just want to play for you a few seconds of this song. I'm not going to have you sing along, but I could. And you have the medieval French lyrics there, luckily for us, translated so we can talk about them. Historians use all sorts of different sources to try to understand the crusading mentality. What drove these people to do what they did? How was crusading a brutal and risky and financially stressful adventure made so appealing to generations of Western Europeans? So we're going to look at one of these sources. As I said, comes from early on in the Crusades, after a big failure with an attempt to get people to join up even more. This kind of music would have been heard by the professional warriors they were appealing to directly. It would have been sung at courts repeatedly. You probably got the sense that it was kind of a catchy tune and was meant to be so. In fact, you might be humming it when you go home today on the bus. Let's read the lyrics that I have here. Knights, now is this your healing hour, when God to you had made his plea against the Moors and Turkish power who treated him dishonorably. They wronged him, and they took his fief, and we must feel the deepest grief. For there God first was served, and then was recognized as Lord by men. If you with Louis will arise, you will not need to fear hell's sword. Your soul will go to paradise with the angels of our Lord. And Louis here is King Louis, who was helping to organize this crusade. Now that we've read the lyrics, I want to try to climb into the shoes, the helmet, the suit of armor of this knight who might have heard and responded to this song. And I'm going to do so by highlighting just a few of the verses here that can tell us a lot about why this might have been an appealing activity for him. Knights, now this is your healing hour. Your soul will go to paradise with the angels of our Lord. Now, apart from deflecting attention away from the bloody battle of crusading, that first line about how it's a healing adventure, this line is crucial in a different way. Healing from what? Compared to the wounds that he might and probably would suffer on the battlefield, the average knight had more serious wounds that he needed to worry about. Wounds on his soul. And why is that? Well, because as a professional warrior, most of the time his job was to hurt people, kill people, other Christians in Western Europe. And that, in the eyes of the church, was a serious sin. In fact, it put his soul in jeopardy. His spiritual salvation might be denied him. And that's something that knights, that soldiers, potential soldiers for the crusade, did not want to lose their souls. They cared about going to heaven. So up until this point, war, their job, was something that they needed to seek forgiveness for. But then something changes. In the Second Crusade, the one that this song is speaking to, church leaders changed the meaning of this kind of war. Instead of something that damages your soul, fighting this crusade was a means of saving it. Fighting is not a sin, it cleanses you of sin. It heals you. And it heals all your spiritual wounds so that you can get all the way to paradise, as the last line suggests, and spend time with the angels of the Lord. This is because the Pope was offering something called a plenary indulgence, which basically was a guaranteed ticket to heaven. So I'm not saying that we can climb into the head of every single potential crusader and see this as the reason why they went. But there's no question, given their concern for spiritual welfare, that those promises were important ones. The crusade, in other words, was attractive because it gave you a knight something that you wanted, that you needed, and that you would have to work otherwise really, really hard to get, and that's salvation. And that powerful incentive was paired with a powerful reminder of what happened if you didn't go on crusade and you don't get that plenary indulgence. You will not need to fear hell's sword. So suggesting if you don't go, you will need to fear hell's sword. And you have a lot to be afraid of. This subtle and indirect threat would have meant a lot, would have conjured up all sorts of images for crusaders at the time. Look at this image here, sculptures on the front of a cathedral in France, depicting the Last Judgment, which in the Christian religion is the moment where Jesus arrives, says, okay, everything's finished now here on earth. We're going to put some people up in heaven and other people down below. And there are some pretty graphic pictures of what happens in that place down below, and they are not good. Lots of devils. Looks like someone's having his face stuffed with a giant frog. He's getting something poked into his ear. That looks like a boiling pot you definitely don't want to be into. And they get still more graphic if you go inside some of these churches, and there's a nasty-looking devil chewing people up. The song picks up and taps in on those cultural references that were everywhere. So a knight might take a serious look at crusading because the consequences of not going were even riskier than the consequences of going. You'd have to deal with a lifetime of spiritual wounds instead of a shorter period of ones you would get on earth. Now let's look at a couple of other lines. What's interesting here is that these lyrics aren't just trying to scare a knight into action. They're also appealing to him in a very different way. When God to you had made his plea, they wronged him, capital H, meaning God. And we must feel the deepest grief. Who's calling him to go on crusade? Can you see from the lyric? Who is sending this message? Come and help. God, exactly. A direct plea from God himself. And why? Because he has been attacked. He has been wronged. He has been harmed. Now, it's not an easy thing to do to turn down a personal request from God himself if you're a Christian, and especially not if you're a medieval Christian. Because Christianity, a religion that is constantly evolving, was at this point emphasizing how important it was to build a strong personal relationship with God, especially Jesus, in all sorts of different ways, in prayer and taking the sacraments. And it was increasingly focused on Jesus as a human being, that side of Jesus, rather than the divine side. And that came through in all sorts of ways. Reminders of his crucifixion, where he was suffering, and little pieces of the cross that they would have in different churches all over the West, and more adorable pictures of baby Jesus. This is where you have all of these pictures and sculptures of Mom Mary and baby Jesus, looking very human, right? He's like tugging at her veil there, and not that sort of sedate, serene God that he might be seen as otherwise. So here you have a song where you have a God talking out, speaking to you in a way that expresses his vulnerability and that is asking you directly for help. And that is getting at you on an emotional level. I'm hurt, I'm harmed, come and save me, feel for me. And that's exactly what this knight as a Christian should have been trying to do. Connect emotionally, build a relationship with God. And here was a chance that he could do it in such a strong and compelling way by going on crusade. So another way in which this was familiar, this was appealing on a very spiritual level. So we're going to move away momentarily from a 12th century song to a 20th century cartoon that reminds us that religious motivations and incentives were not the only thing that sent people on crusade. Right? Why did you become a crusader? You don't even go to church. Military culture, material incentives, land, plunder, these were some of the things that drove crusaders to take the risks that they did. Now, in the song that we're looking at now, there are no offers of land and gold, but a knight listening to these verses would have found a connection and an appeal in other things besides religion. God who is being treated dishonorably. They, those Seljuk Turks, wronged him and took his fief. What is going on here? For the knights listening to this song, the political and economic world that they knew, that they operated in, consisted of a hierarchy of personal bonds. Feudal culture. Above, you've got the lord, a king or a prince, and beneath him were vassals who were bound in a feudal relationship to that lord. The lord gives the vassals a bunch of privileges and usually some land, and the vassals in return offer military protection and loyalty, among other things. Honor here is fundamental. You keep your contract. You fulfill your agreement in this relationship. So what's going on here? What is the knight listening to these lyrics here? He hears that his lord was treated dishonorably, capital L, that his lord's fief was taken away. What does that word mean? Fief is land. If you are given land, if you hold land, it's in the form of a fief. So here you have the Holy Land being referred to in the terms that they would have understood as part of feudal culture. What does a good knight do when his lord is being attacked, when his land has been taken away from him? He's been dishonored. He defends him. And he doesn't just do it because he's a nice guy. He has to. He must, for the sake of his honor and his life probably, defend the lord to whom he is a vassal. That's his contract. And so that's what he's got to do here. Lord capital L is calling him to do his job as a Christian and to fight back for the land that was lost. So what are we learning from all of these lyrics? The ways in which the person writing this song was able to make crusading so unappealing, immensely appealing, by tapping into the culture of the time and making the knight see his own priorities line up perfectly with what the crusade could offer him. It's an exercise analyzing this bit of the song, and there's more to it, that shows you a lot of different things, how much you can tease out of a very short historical document. And that's something you'll do all the time in the context of your classes here. And a lot of fun you can have doing it as well. You'll learn what it's like to be a person in the past, what it means to be human in different ways. And that's what I meant and what Jennifer Spear, our chair, meant when she said learning about history is learning about people and human beings. We just tried to figure out what a crusader would have gone through, what it was like to think and feel like him, to have his values and the struggles he would have experienced trying to make a decision about whether or not he should go on this life-threatening mission. And that's a pretty powerful task and an important one to take on and to come away with a strong and complex answer for. You get to see just how clever some of the works of writing are in this period as well. This songwriter packed a lot into a very few lines. And we've got to give it to him, give a lot to him for what he was able to do to impress upon potential crusaders his message. I've in turn tried to pack a lot into the very short time I've had with you today, but I do hope that you are intrigued enough to take history courses, perhaps about this period, to come back for the rest of this song and more about the world from which it came. Thank you very much.
Okay, everybody, it's me again. I hope you all enjoyed that. Thanks for listening and for participating with your mind in that great talk by Professor O'Brien and Professor Lear. If you guys have questions about applying to SFU or questions about majoring in history specifically, Tessa is again here, who you met in the donut room, to answer any questions that you have about the mechanics of applying or about the mechanics of a history degree. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you enjoyed Claire's talk about what you can do with a history degree. I also did, like many of your teachers, an arts degree at SFU. I learned how to breakdance at SFU while I was here. I became a professional breakdancer while I was at SFU. Student life is really exciting here because, as Jennifer mentioned, this is a liberal university where you meet really cool people and do really cool things. So thanks again for coming and for your attention. And thanks to Corinne. And she's going to talk to you, I think, before she dismisses you.